Oh, you're here. Good. I was hoping for company. You see, I've got stories, dark ones, chilling ones, the kind that keep you up at night. Mythical creatures, curses, horrors you can't escape. Shall we begin? Don't worry, I won't bite. Much.
This is a story every Chinese person knows. In the famous novel Investiture of the Gods, King Zhou of Shang was depicted as a depraved ruler, seduced by the demonic concubine, Daji. He built pools filled with wine, created torturous punishments like burning people alive, and brutally murdered loyal ministers. His cruelty incited rebellion, leading to the fall of the Shang Dynasty. But have you ever considered that the myth of Investiture of the Gods might have been created to cover up an even darker truth? The horrifying human sacrifices of the Shang Dynasty. The Shang Dynasty was the first recorded civilization in Chinese history, a golden age of power and culture. But in its final years, its rulers took extreme measures. King Daixin, also known as King Zhou in legends, began conducting massive human sacrifices in an attempt to sustain his reign. At Yinxu, the ruins of the Shang capital in present-day Anyang, Henan, archaeologists uncovered numerous sacrificial pits. In these pits lay the remains of over 5,000 people, all beheaded, dismembered, or ritually killed as offerings to the gods. But the most horrifying part? The skeletons were arranged neatly. Their wrists and necks bore clear knife marks, and some had even been cut open, their hearts ripped out. Who killed them? And why? Evidence points to a chilling possibility. The fall of the Shang Dynasty may have been caused by one final, terrifying, ultimate sacrifice. Today, we take you 3,000 years back in time to witness the blood sacrifice of Yin. What was the true fate of these lost souls? And could this legend have been more than just myth? 1070 BCE, late Shang Dynasty, Yin capital. The night was heavy, with an eerie stillness. Cold winds whispered through the towering walls of the city, bringing with them a sense of foreboding. Every citizen of Yin knew, tonight, the king would hold the largest blood sacrifice in history. At the peak of the towering sacrificial altar, King Daixin, known in folklore as King Zhou of Shang, sat upon his golden throne, draped in black and gold armor. His gaze was sharp, like that of an eagle, fixed on the massive bronze cauldron burning at the center of the square. All across the Grand Plaza, the people of Yin knelt in silence, their heads pressed against the ground, not daring to look up. They knew what was about to happen. Tonight, over 100 lives would be offered to the heavens. Beneath the altar, 120 prisoners were bound and forced to kneel in 2 long rows. Their hands were tied behind their backs, mouths stuffed with black cloth, their eyes filled with pure terror. Some were war captives. Some were nobles, condemned for treason. Some were young men and women, specifically chosen for their pure bloodlines. And now they awaited the judgment of the gods. From the towering platform, the Grand High Priest lifted his arms. His deep and commanding voice echoed through the night sky. The mandate of heaven has spoken. The blood of 100 souls shall be offered to the heavens, so that the Shang Dynasty may rule for another 1,000 years. King Daixin rose from his throne. His piercing gaze swept across the sacrificial plaza. His expression was unreadable, as though this was nothing more than a routine ritual. This was not the first human sacrifice in the Shang Dynasty. But tonight, the scale of the sacrifice was unprecedented. The towering flames of the sacrificial cauldron cast flickering shadows over the square, illuminating the blood-stained bronze vessel that had seen countless deaths. And among the kneeling captives, one young man's gaze was different from the others. His name was Wu Zheng. He was the most precious sacrifice of the night. But unlike the others, he had no fear in his eyes, only cold, murderous intent. Because Wu Zheng did not intend to die. Wu Cheng's heart pounded violently, but his face remained expressionless. He slowly flexed his wrists. The ropes had cut deep into his skin, turning his hands numb. But he could not move yet. He had to wait. Wait for the perfect moment. Above him, The Grand High Priest, the man who controlled every blood ritual in the Shang Dynasty, stood at the edge of the altar. His gaze swept across the sacrificial grounds, and a chilling smile formed on his lips. Tonight marks the most glorious day of the Shang Dynasty. He placed his hand upon the massive bronze cauldron, feeling the warmth of the freshly spilled blood within. His fingers dipped into the red stains, and his voice grew ecstatic. The gods have spoken. Blood is the key to the Empire's survival. At that moment, Wu Zheng raised his head slightly and looked up at King Dixin, who stood above them on the grand altar. His eyes turned ice cold, because he knew a secret, one that could bring down the entire city of Yin. Wu Zheng's father had once been the chief oracle priest, responsible for reading the divine messages on oracle bones. But 10 years ago, on the eve of a grand sacrifice, Wu Zheng's father had whispered to him, "The gods have never answered. These sacrifices are meaningless. The high priests have fabricated their prophecies." Wu Zheng had refused to believe it, until the day he watched his own mother be dragged to the altar, her chest sliced open, her blood fed to the gods. The gods had remained silent. No miracle had descended upon Yin. The truth was clear. King Dixin did not conduct these sacrifices for divine blessings. He did it to maintain his iron grip on power. Wu Zheng clenched his fists. Tonight the grand ritual would reach its peak. And before that happened, he had to act. The flames crackled. Shadows danced wildly across the sacrificial square. Wu Zheng's mind raced. He had to find a way out. And then, something strange happened. A sudden gust of icy wind swept across the plaza. It carried with it a low, whispering voice, like an ancient chant drifting through the air. Wu Zheng's head snapped up. And then, he saw it. On the grand altar, King Dixin's expression had changed. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. Then, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. One of the sacrificial victims convulsed violently. His eyes rolled back, his body twisted unnaturally, and his mouth stretched open in a silent, endless wail, as if he had seen something beyond human comprehension. Then another captive began to tremble. Their eyes turned bloodshot, lips parting as they whispered, "Blood cycles. Blood returns." A chilling silence spread across the plaza, and at the altar, the Grand High Priest's face went deathly pale. No, this isn't possible. Wu Zheng's blood ran cold. He understood. The souls of the sacrificed were returning. Boom! A crimson bolt of lightning tore through the sky. The sacrificial altar trembled violently as flames flickered in the fierce wind, casting eerie shadows over the horrified crowd. Wu Zheng stumbled back, his eyes locked onto the bronze cauldron, his heart pounding in disbelief. Just moments ago, cracks had spread across its surface, and now, dark red blood was slowly oozing from within, dripping onto the sacrificial stones like it had a life of its own. On the high platform, King Dixin shot to his feet. His gaze dropped to the ground, where a long, jagged crack had formed beneath his throne. For the first time, fear crossed his face. In the plaza, panic erupted. Some fell to their knees, bowing so forcefully their heads struck the stone, their voices trembling. "The gods have descended! The gods have descended!" But standing beside the king, the Grand High Priest turned deathly pale. His lips trembled. His pupils contracted violently. And in that moment, he realized the truth. A hoarse whisper escaped his mouth. "No, this is not a divine blessing. It's a curse." He spun to face King Dixin, his voice frantic. "Your Majesty, stop the ritual immediately. These are not the messengers of the gods." But it was already too late. A deep guttural breathing sound filled the air. Wu Zheng froze. He slowly turned his head and saw the dead rise. The sacrifices who had been slain, their throats cut, their bodies drained of blood. suddenly began to move. Their fingers twitched, their backs arched, dark inky blood trickled from their mouths, and their empty eyes flickered open. They stood up. A prisoner whose neck had been halfway severed lifted a trembling arm, his broken throat gurgling out one word. Blood. Then, one after another, the dead opened their eyes, their pupils black as the abyss, their lips twitching as they whispered in unison. Blood. Returns. Blood. 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 A terrifying wail echoed through the night. This sacrifice was never meant to end. For centuries, the souls of the sacrificed had never left. Buried beneath the city, sealed within the bronze cauldron, they had waited. Now, the seal was broken. King Dixin stumbled backward, his face drained of all color. His regal composure had vanished, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. "Kill them! Kill them all!" he roared, drawing his sword as he turned to his soldiers. The warriors hesitated but obeyed. Swords flashed, cutting through the air. One soldier drove his bronze blade straight into a risen corpse's chest, but the dead felt nothing. The slain man turned his head slowly, his jaw snapping unnaturally wide. A sick grin stretched across his decaying face. The soldier's eyes widened in horror. Crack! In an instant, the dead man's fingers snapped around the soldier's throat and twisted. A sickening pop echoed across the plaza. The soldier's lifeless body collapsed to the ground. The remaining soldiers stared in paralyzed terror. Their hands shook. No one dared to take another step. "You fools!" King Dixin bellowed. He turned to the Grand High Priest, voice trembling with barely concealed panic. "What is this?" The priest's breath was ragged. His eyes were wide with dread. "Your Majesty, this is the prophecy of the reverse sacrifice." King Dixin's expression twisted. "What?" The Grand High Priest's lips quivered. The ancient rulers of Shang left behind a warning. If too much blood is spilled in sacrifice, the souls will no longer ascend to the heavens. They will not become divine messengers. They will become the forsaken. They will not bring fortune. They will seek vengeance. His voice cracked. They will kill everyone who took part in the sacrifices. Boom! The earth split apart. The colossal bronze cauldron tipped forward, crashing onto the royal throne. King Dixin staggered back, his crimson cloak billowing in the wind as he watched his throne drown in a flood of blackened blood. At that moment, he knew. The gods had abandoned him. The ground beneath the plaza began to collapse. The people of Yin screamed in terror as they ran in all directions. But the Forsaken were too fast. Those they caught were drained dry in an instant, their bodies shriveling into lifeless husks. Wu Zheng turned to the Grand High Priest, grabbing him by the robe. "Tell me, how do we stop them?" The priest's breath came in desperate gasps. His eyes gleamed with madness. "There is only one way." Wu Zheng's grip tightened. "What is it?" The Grand High Priest lifted his gaze to King Dixin. "Only the blood of the most powerful ruler can seal the curse." Wu Zheng's blood turned to ice. He understood immediately. King Dixin had to die. King Dixin's eyes darted between them. He gritted his teeth. "You wouldn't dare." Wu Zheng's fingers brushed the hilt of his dagger. His heart pounded. He turned his gaze toward the burning city. The soldiers, the nobles, the common folk, all being slaughtered by the vengeful dead. All because of one man, the king, the ruler of Yin, the architect of every sacrifice. If he lived, the killing would never end. Wu Zheng's eyes turned cold. His grip tightened around the dagger. And then, he charged. King Dixin's pupils shrank. He lifted his sword to parry, but Wu Zheng was faster. Slash! The dagger pierced deep into the king's heart. Everything went silent. The wind stopped. The Forsaken paused, turning their hollow gazes toward the high altar. Wu Zheng stood motionless, watching as King Dixin gasped, his strength fading, his once mighty body collapsing. And then, the Shang King fell. 3 months later, the Shang Dynasty fell. King Wu of Zhou led his army into Yin, where he found a city drowned in death and silence. Thousands of years later, archaeologists unearthed over 5,000 human remains at the ruins of Yinxu. Their bones bore marks of ritual execution, their bodies arranged in eerie, ceremonial formations, and their final frozen expressions were twisted in terror. These findings matched ancient records of the reverse sacrifice, an omen of a fallen dynasty. So now, we ask you, do you still believe that investiture of the gods was just a myth?